We are live. As people start coming into the room, welcome everybody to the Human Solutions live stream. We're grateful that you are here. Don't forget, you can ask questions in YouTube, and they will come in to us, and we will do our best to answer them. And right as we begin, Sarah is gone.
She leaves us. Sarah leaves us.
We are doing great. I felt like this was going to be the one. The problem is, I said to myself, I think this is going to be the one where we don't have any issues.
Oh, here she comes.
Back.
Hi.
She's back.
Suddenly went down. Apologies.
No
It's
worries,
okay.
no worries.
You're back.
All right. And with that, I say we shall begin.
Okay.
Welcome, everybody, to Human Solutions, simplifying HR for people who love HR from AIM HR Solutions on True Story FM. I'm Pete Wright, and today you're on center stage. We asked you what's keeping you up at night, and you did not hold back. From sticky time-off scenarios to policy rollouts that just won't sit still and tension between teams that is starting to show, we're bringing you real-world challenges straight to the folks who can help. Sarah Piscatelli and Terry Cook are back with their mix of legal insight and practical HR wisdom, ready to break it all down. Let's get to it. Terry, Sarah, welcome back.
Thanks,
Thank
Pete.
you, Pete.
Okay, so let us begin with the first question. Let's dig right in. Can an employee take unpaid vacation or sick time even if they have paid time available but choose not to use it? I look at this question and it seems like it should be fairly straightforward, and yet it's here. Why are we talking about it? Terry, you want to start us off?
Sure. I think that what happens is people want to save their time. So if there's something coming up at the earlier part of the year, or if there's a sickness at the earlier part of the year, they're fearful that they're going to need that time later. So they may ask for that time. Alternatively, some people just want more vacation than their company is giving them. So that can be another reason why they ask for the unpaid time for that purpose. Again, for sick time, sometimes it's that people are trying to save it. Some people just feel like, well, I want to use it, and I feel like everybody should let me just use it without using paid time off. So there's a lot of reasons people might bring that up to the human resources department. But to your point, I think a lot of companies, their answer is usually, no, if you have it, you need to use it. Again, I'll let Sarah get into some of the exceptions around, like in Massachusetts for the paid family leave, things of that nature. But again, in general, it's really up to the company and their policy.
Well, I want to ask a sort of adjacent question to your answer before we transition to the regulatory stuff.
Sure.
This is one of those areas where it feels to me like you're going to have this policy that says, as you said, generally, no, if you have it, you have to use it. How do you communicate that clearly when, if I put myself in the shoes of the employee, my gut says, why do you even have this policy? Why do you care? Why is it important to you? How do you make that case?
And I think it is that you have to explain to people that you're planning on the productivity issues. It can alter, the schedules of things that are going out. It can impact the team because they're one person short on the team. But, to your point, Pete, I think it is. People say, what's the difference? Recently had a call where somebody said somebody decided to plan a 3-week vacation. They had 2 weeks coming to them. They assumed, what's the big deal? To your point, you're not paying me. Just give me the time off. And the company was, saying, why would you plan a 3-week vacation when you have 2 weeks coming to you, and you haven't really even asked us? Because it does, as they said, it impacts the team. You're out for 3 weeks in a row. It's not the 3 weeks in a row that we were planning. And it's that kind of thing. So I think it's things like that come up. I do agree that there's plenty of people that say, if you're not paying me, let it go.
Yeah, right. Well, because you don't want to get into the situation where you go to HR and HR says, well, it's just because it's policy. And I kind of agree with you. Like, I understand, but this is the way it is. That does not, that sets up a weird sort of, we're all against the process kind of a vibe.
Right.
And we don't want to get there. Sarah.
Well, and where does it stop?
Right?
Right.
Right. Absolutely.
That's
Do you
the
want to
thing is
take Yeah, go ahead, Sarah.
It really is a slippery slope, right? So you need the policy, but there are some legal constraints where you may have to make an exception to your policy. For example, if you have, suppose you have one bucket of time off, so it's combined sick and vacation leave, and you have an employee who regularly later in the year, say August, September, goes to visit family in another country, right? Always requests that time off, has that time off, has bought his airline tickets, etc. Then he gets sick, or he may have a disability, right? The Americans with Disabilities Act can require leave as a reasonable accommodation. So if you went and fired that person because he needed to take time off earlier in the year, you could be in trouble, right? Because he could be protected by the ADA. So there are things like that, as well as other leave laws. Here in Massachusetts, we have small necessities leave. It's similar to school leave in other states where employees are allowed to take unpaid time off to attend school activities, sometimes medical appointments, for the children, as well as elder care. So in a lot of states have those. And in Massachusetts, you get up to 24 hours per year. It's limited to people who are FMLA eligible, that sort of thing. But in any case, you could be violating a law like that, that does give them some time off. And the small necessities leave, by the way, you can require that somebody use PTO for it. But I'd be a little careful in that situation where the person has made a vacation, plans to use all of his paid time off later in the year, and then has something come up that it needs the time off. But I think it's better to have a policy disallowing it. And if you have to make exceptions, then you do make the rare exception.
Is this why we saw a trend some years ago where a lot of companies were like, we're just going to give you much more PTO and you can use it for whatever you want, and we don't even want to think about it? Is that sort of where those policies started to arise? Because this can get complicated.
Yes, and I think we do see a lot of that, right, Terry? Where people combine the sick and vacation time, and they can use it either way.
I think they're trying to make a scenario where an employee doesn't feel like they have to lie to you about taking time off.
Exactly.
You put one bucket. They don't have to tell you if they're sick, if they're taking personal vacation time. It kind of takes the pressure off them, and makes an easier environment. There's certainly some issues that can happen when somebody has one bucket. We can go there if people have questions later. But yeah, I think, Pete, in general, I think that's why people might put it all in one bucket, give them the freedom to use it.
Okay. Let us transition to question number 2. What is the best way to roll out policy changes clearly and consistently? And how can we track compliance when things are frequently changing? Examples of policy changes that may need to be rolled out include updates to remote or hybrid work expectations, adjustments to PTO, accrual or usage rules, and revised procedures for requesting time off. And I will throw in, when I was on a vacation with a family friend who works for the department, for government department. He's a diplomat, and he is working HR at an embassy, and said, my issue is our regulatory environment is changing almost every day. How do we keep people? So it feels like we're right in line with how we handle successful policy rollouts in dynamic environments. Terry?
Yeah, I think it's about communication. It's being clear. It's being, concise about what's going on. So many times a company might make a change to a big policy like paid time off or something else, attendance, things like that. They might put it in the handbook, and the handbook may be online. But if you're not communicating that and taking that special extra step to have these meetings, to do the communications, to provide the examples of, the new policy, what are the changes? Why are these changes in place? Then it's harder to say that you can have an expectation that the employee understands the policy. And that would go into Sarah's legal situations too. But you always want to make sure that the employees know about any policy changes, especially significant ones.
Can you reflect on the tracking bit? And maybe that's a bridge question for both of you, but tracking compliance, it seems to be, that's something we need to have a box which we can check that everybody gets this. Best practices, ideas, concerns?
Yeah, I think you can do them in group meetings. Sometimes people will just have an employee list overall, and as they get assigned a policy back, they're checking them off, they're putting them in a file. Other times, managers will take smaller groups. So you give each manager a list that says, here's the people that have this, and you let them sign off with the date that they received the policy. I found that easier to use when I was doing, for example, my annual sign off for my harassment awareness policy, because then I would keep a separate folder in my desk that would say 2025 annual policy distribution. And each department, I would have the list of the employees, their signatures that they have received and read the policy with dates. And that way, if there were ever a question that came up, I knew that every single department was covered and it was all in one place. Now, some people will do individual sign-offs for each employee, and they just put it in their employee file that way as well. So I think it's what works best.
Okay. Sarah, we turn to you, talking about the importance of documenting these kinds of updates at the employee level and legal risks that come into when we're dealing with policy enforcement.
Yes. Well, one, to answer an earlier question you had, Pete, in order to stay up to date, subscribe to everything, legal newsletters, Department of Labor, so many, you'll end up with too many emails, of course, but follow those. And here at AIM, we do, for our AIM members, they get a lot of emails with updates, okay, because obviously we're staying on top of that. So that's one way to track the changes. And it is, another thing I want to mention is if you have a significant portion of your workforce that is non-native speakers, I would be sure to have a translation. Okay, that isn't always required, but it isn't necessarily legally required, but you're always going to be asked, did you disseminate this policy? Yeah, we did, but it was in English, and half our workforce speaks Spanish. That's not going to help you very much, because often when a court looks at these, they take basic principles of fairness. It doesn't matter if there's a law or whatever. How do you expect these people to follow this policy when you really haven't made it understandable for them? So that's just one note. And there's actually a case in Massachusetts from many years ago where I don't know the context of it because it's such an obscure case that I can't find the opinion online, but it has but it was where an employee, I don't know if it was an unemployment case or not, but the employee was fired for not following a policy, and the court said, wait, this person doesn't even speak English, how could they follow the policy? So there is precedent for it here, and I think in general, yeah, be sure that there is a translation if it's needed so that people know about the policies.
Okay, and it feels like we've gone around this particular merry-go-round before, and the questions that keep coming back in are pretty clearly answered if you are communicating clearly and everything is documented.
Yes.
Okay.
And also, it might, the communication might depend on the type of operation you have. You might have half your workforce isn't on email, for example. Then email is not an effective way to communicate. So just as a practical matter, think about, do we have an annual meeting? This all hands type meeting. That's a great time to introduce these policies and get sign off that people have received them.
I think that's a really great point. We've, once worked with a foundry that had exactly that scenario, and so they worked on communicating policy changes by flyer on the back of the inside of bathroom stall doors. Most of us thought that's probably not sufficient to clarify that they have received this information.
That's right.
Right.
And might be problematic. So is there a hard line for how you communicate these changes for folks, how you communicate important changes?
There really isn't. Again, there are no, some policies, there are legal requirements, that you have to give it to everybody when they're onboarding. And of course, in Massachusetts, we require that the harassment policy be given annually, always get a sign off, et cetera. But other than that, there really aren't any, legal standards, but using common sense, you figure out what is the best way to communicate this and to be able to, as Terry said, to document that you have communicated the policy to them.
Yeah, I think the proof is in the important part. So no one's going to be able to prove that somebody read something behind a bathroom door in your example, Pete. But,
Exactly.
if you get into any type of scenario, it could be as simple as an unemployment case, or it could be an actual lawsuit, and Sarah's mentioning it as well. You have the burden of proof to let people know how your employees found that out. So in Sarah's example, if somebody knew that the employees did not speak English and they chose only to send out all the information in English, then they should have known that that person may not have understood or received that.
Yeah,
so I think
right.
it's really important.
Okay. Let us turn our attention to question 3, which may be the most have the most potential for team fireworks when I think about this question. How should we address ongoing tension between employees working different shifts or under varying arrangements, e.g., remote, hybrid, flexible, when it's affecting teamwork? There may be some assumptions we have to make in this question. So, if you have assumptions you'd like to make as you're talking about this, I'll allow it. Terry, would you like to start?
Thanks, Pete, for letting me make assumptions.
Yeah, you're welcome. May it please the court.
Yeah, no, I think, when I think of this question, a lot of times, especially in recent years, I think of people that might work in person versus remote versus hybrid. I think that question comes up a lot. Teams might have strong feelings of one way or the other, that they feel like everything should be all in person or everybody should be all remote or hybrid. And there also has a piece where some people just can't be remote. And that will cause tension because they say, well, those people have a better life balance, work-life balance. Those people have different abilities than I do. So they're worried about teamwork in the sense that people have hostile feelings towards each other. But I also make an assumption that people might be worried about being able to communicate with each other at the right times when somebody's not making themselves available because they have a different shift that they might like to work, or they're remote and they have more flexibility needs. So I think there's a lot that can happen. And I do think that there's some companies that have really come up with some nice creative ways to handle that tension. But I do think it comes up. And I think even before remote work, I think sometimes even I worked in a manufacturing environment for years. There was tensions between people that had to work on the floor versus the office. And as far as them saying, in the summer, a nice hot day, right? Like today, that they, people in the office have the ability to have air conditioning. They're more comfortable. And then the people on the floor might say, well, geez, that's not fair. They're in the, they don't have that chance. So I think those types of tensions are kind of what I'm assuming in this question.
Okay. Sarah, this is where things can escalate quickly. And from the perspective of legal, acting in a way that protects both the organization's interests and the employees' interests, where do you step in when this conflict starts to occur?
Great. When it's different. It varies depending on the circumstances, as always. But if somebody reports something, the employer should investigate it. It's possible that there is something going on. Say somebody's complaining, okay, the first shift, they're not as productive as we are, et cetera. Another thing you should think about, too, is that sometimes remote work, or hybrid work even, is given as an accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And if that's the case, you as the employer can't share that, because somebody might say, 8 members of our team, we're here every day. This is an in-person work site. And then we have one person who just comes in one day a week, and it may be because of a disability, and your hands are sort of tied in communicating that comes up with a lot of accommodations, not just a remote hybrid type situation. Why does this person get to come in 15 minutes later every day or something like that? And that's a tough one to deal with, because it really is none of their business, as well as issues of medical privacy, et cetera. So that can be difficult to kind of get through, move them along. But if they're, at times there could be something that's worth investigating. If there's a lot of antagonism, sometimes it could be a harassment situation, for example. Really, it could be an unlawful harassment situation. Could be just bullying, but you may have a policy that prohibits workplace bullying. You really do have to be sure that you get to the bottom of, like, what's underneath this, and again, communicate well, as Terry said, and really talk to everybody involved. It could be a can of worms. It might not be, though. It might be just simple resentment, that people have. So.
Yeah, it feels like we've got this we've got this barrier that exists between documentation and clear policy communication and supporting a team culture. Not even just the full team, but you mentioned like a small team that's together where 8 of us are always here and one person's not. What that breeds is a microculture of mistrust when you don't know why and that person doesn't know why. It seems like we need to talk about the opportunity to train the company on why it's none of their business, right? Why it's okay not to ask, and to assume goodwill. I have never been trained, please assume goodwill, of your teammates in my years of working in corporate culture. I've never been taught that.
Yeah.
Is that a thing? I mean, is that a thing that we can that we can we can get signatures against?
I think a lot of people's rules of conduct is, treat others with courtesy and respect, and that's the basic rule. Like you're saying, assume goodwill, treat other people like you want to be treated. We do try. And to your point, Pete, I get the frustration, like in Sarah's examples, if there's something medical going on, we in human resources, we cannot disclose that information to other people. It's private information. It's protected, as Sarah mentioned. So it puts everybody in a tough spot, because they're like, well, I want to know why Terry's not having to do this. And if you can't explain it, then I'm assuming you're treating Terry better than you're treating me.
If Terry really cared about this team, Terry would be here. Terry would not be advocating for this special circumstance.
Yeah, she wants her own circumstance. Yeah, and I think that's common, where people will make, like you said, they're not assuming goodwill. They're assuming somebody's trying to take advantage, somebody's getting better treatment. And then you go back to what Sarah's saying. Again, you can't disclose it, but you investigate. You try to get to the bottom of things. You try to explain certain scenarios happen. Sometimes it means that there is other flexibility offered to others if it can happen. And other times it's just for the person that needs the accommodation. So it's a tough spot.
Yes.
I think it puts us in a really interesting box, because it's often systemic, or right? The root causes of this kind of tension, the things we care about are not necessarily the fact that one person is, has a special circumstances. The things we care about are things aren't normal anymore after, whatever you want to say, after COVID, after economy changes, after shift shutdowns, whatever the case. And to what degree do you, as HR professionals, you work to figure out, to sort of discern those root causes and train and grow against those? Does that make sense?
It does. And that's why I recommend having investigating, finding out a lot more, because very often it's one person who starts all of this, right? And then it just spreads, right? Everybody sort of jumps on the bandwagon, and they're all saying, oh, geez, they're turned against this one person who has remote work, or even the next shift, which they claim isn't as productive as they are. So, and it might be that person needs to be, coached, managed a bit, and really shown you just cannot speak about these things. It's very unhelpful.
Well, and I think to Sarah's point, if you look into it right away, you're heading off other problems. So if you turn your head and say, geez, I don't really want to look into that. That's a lot of conflict. It seems like nothing that's worth the time right now. Well, then, Terry talks to Sarah, Sarah talks to Pete, Pete talks to Tom, and then your problem went from one person that might have had a concern that you might have been able to just have a conversation about to see what the issue is, to a huge situation. Because at the end of the day, there are employees that just want to be heard. They want you to know what their concerns are. They want to see that you're paying attention to them, that you're responsive to them, and it may not blow up into this huge scenario that it didn't have to be.
Yeah. Panel question. Do we need to treat all unpaid time off requests the same, even if one person has a legitimate hardship? What do you think, Sarah?
I would say no. I think I gave some examples earlier. Was this our first question, I believe?
Yes.
And was talking about situations where you may have to give the unpaid time off. And I think you're going to have to make exceptions, which is tough when you're putting this policy into place. There'll be none of that. And then the law requires you to make exceptions. Yeah. So a hardship, I'm not sure what they mean, what is meant by hardship, but if it is, for example, the situation I was talking about, somebody has their, end of year vacation all planned, and then they have a flare up of a medical condition, for example, earlier, you really do. You have to give them the time off unpaid.
Yeah. On our second topic, what is the best way to handle, Terry, this is for you, so listen very carefully.
I'm
What is the
listening.
best way to handle employees who ignore updates or don't complete training tied to new policies?
Yeah, I think if it's something that's required, it's something that's in the handbook, for example, it's a condition of employment. I mean, I'll let Sarah chime in as well, but there's a scenario I can think of in my past where we had a different handbook come out. Several policies might have been different, and we asked people to review the handbook again and sign off on it. And there was one person that said, I'm not signing off on it. And I said, it's a condition of your employment to stay here. This is the handbook. This is our policy. This is what we're doing. Sarah, I don't know if you would add to that or not, but.
Yeah, no, I feel the same. I would chase them down, make sure that they do sign it. And also, when I'm drafting handbooks, I always do put in sort of as a catch-all in case somebody says, I didn't see that policy. Is this handbook, the policies in this handbook can be updated anytime with or without notice, blah, blah, blah. Kind of, it covers the company, for those situations where somebody says, oh, I never got that one, right? So, because that's what they would say in that case, even if you did try to, chase them down to sign off on it.
This last question, I think, is it deals with that issue in particular, and it's a technical question. You guys have used a lot of platforms. What tools or platforms do you recommend for tracking employee acknowledgement without overcomplicating things? Got an organization, I'm assuming, that is looking for a way to mature their HR oversight of policy. Do you have any that you really recommend that are good?
I think it's not a platform per se, but I think some people have been sharing that they're using DocuSign as far as for ease of getting those signatures and getting them back. Whereas, some people might not be available to come in to make a signature, or they put off sending it to you. So I think DocuSign is one. I know there are some HRIS systems and certain things that will allow you to put something there and allow you to get some type of sign off. I know, like for performance management systems, for example, you can do a performance review and allow them the signature. I would say more than not, I've heard more about people utilizing DocuSign. I don't know, Sarah, if you've heard anything else on the helpline.
Yeah, no, I know that is used quite a bit. I just also want to point out too that you want to put the acknowledgement into that person's personnel file. Okay, that is made a part of their personnel file. You also have to keep some sort of a checklist, maybe even just an Excel list of employees where you check off. Okay, we got the acknowledgement back. Put it into the, just for your own sake to know that you've gotten everybody's sign off on the policy. Yep.
Sure. Does AIM? Do we have a catalog of training to help people get better at these things, you guys?
Absolutely. We have over 60 or 70 now trainings that we offer. So they can be anything from topics like this. There's training that it's obviously targeted more towards supervisors and managers, but we have trainings that help individual employees as well. And then we have human resources training for those of us that are HR people and need compliance help. So yeah, absolutely. Our website, aimhrsolutions.com, you'll be able to find our training catalog, and it'll have full descriptions of all of the sessions.
Outstanding. And these questions today came in by way of the helpline. And we are very excited to get more and more questions. Sarah, you're on the helpline, right? You'll pick up the phone. This is very exciting. If you want to talk to Sarah personally about your question, you might get Sarah's answer at 800-470-6277 or email helpline@aimnet.org for inquiries Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. And we try to get email requests responded to within 24 hours. Thank you both so much for today's rapid fire You Asked, We Answered webinar. So appreciate you both. Terry Cook, Sarah Piscatelli, thank you guys.
Thank you, Pete.
Thanks, Pete.
And thank you, everyone who has joined us today. We appreciate you so much. Find links for this event, aimhrsolutions.com. You can also, if you have not yet subscribed to the podcast version of this and you want to hear it again, it'll be in the podcast this time next week, along with all of our past webinars. Subscribe to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, anywhere the finer podcasts are served. On behalf of Sarah Piscatelli and Terry Cook, I'm Pete Wright, and we'll see you next month right here on the Human Solutions webinar.